My autistic son's school forced him to eat peanuts, despite a severe allergy. When his teacher tried to frame me, I ended her entire career. But now she's back, trying to convince my son she is his friend, and I don't trust her. My son had autism, but even worse, he had a peanut allergy. Somehow no one knows this, but it's actually a pretty deadly combo. You see, when my son came home from his elementary school, I noticed he had rashes on his arms. When I asked him what happened, he could barely communicate it to me. Peanuts, I ate, was all he managed to say. I figured that he had forgotten he was allergic to peanuts and had eaten his friends, because this was something that happened once in a while. So I rubbed some soothing, mainly placebo cream, and he was back to normal. "Thank you so much, Daddy," he said, flapping his arms in the air. I hugged him back, and the next morning I left a large photo of peanuts in his bag with a red X through it, as a reminder that he's allergic. Except the next day, it got even worse. Not only was there a large rash covering his arms, legs, and face, but his tongue had also swelled up to almost double the size. It could barely even fit in his mouth. Luckily, I had the patience of a worm, so I reapplied the cream and held up ice until things were back to normal. "Daddy?" His voice was sheepish, like he was scared or something. "It wasn't my fault." And instead of giving me further explanation, he just burst into tears. I nodded and reassured him that all he had to do was stop eating peanuts, and he would be okay. Up until this point, Mikey had no issue with listening to what I told him to do. So when he didn't even nod or make eye contact with me, an awful gut feeling washed over me. So that evening I called the SNA, special needs assistant, at his school. I asked if she could keep a lookout for Mikey during lunchtime, and she promised she would. The next day, she sent me a video. I opened it in the bathroom during work, and suddenly, tears were covering my entire phone screen. So much so that it started moving by itself, because right there were the bullies of the 5th grade. They were pouring peanuts into my son's hands and telling them if he didn't eat them, they were going to unalive him. They were skinny, small effers, but my son was yet to understand the concept of people saying stuff without meaning it. So there he was, shoving them down his throat, his face stained with tears. The video ended when the SNA realized what was going on and walked over to them. She told me she was putting them in detention, but unfortunately, this wasn't enough for me, because I think anyone who is cowardly enough to harm someone completely defenseless deserves to suffer, especially if that someone is my son. And luckily, I worked in a warehouse filled with ex-cons willing to make some extra cash. So right after watching the video, I talked to my buddy Malik. I didn't say anything, just showed him the video. He almost looked even more disgusted than I did, because he loved my son. He had come over to babysit multiple times, and Mikey loved him too. For context, he wasn't arrested for anything crazy. He had simply been caught stealing $200 worth of food for his family. He told me he wasn't going to do it himself, but he knew a few kids from juvie who were also in 5th grade who'd be more than willing. For the next few days, nothing changed. Mikey was still coming home with severe peanut allergies that were only getting worse. Apparently, the teachers were too scared of the kids to do anything, so poor Mikey was left completely unguarded. But the next week, something changed. Mikey didn't come home with any signs of allergies, just some marks on his fists, like he had punched someone. I called Malik, and when he picked up the phone, he was laughing so loudly it hurt my ears. He told me that the juvie kids went in as school ended looking for trouble, and as soon as the bullies saw them walk closer, they immediately backed down. But the juvie kids ended up sucker punching them in the stomach for good measure. Then, they riled up my son Mikey by throwing grass at him, and this ended up overstimulating him so much that he beat up the juvie kids. The kids let him do it. So when the bullies saw it all go down, they got so scared that it was obvious they had no intention of ever harming my son again. I was filled with a strange sense of pride. I knew Mikey could stand up for himself. All he needed was a little push. I immediately hung up and brought him to his favorite diner. We ordered Mickey Mouse-shaped pancakes, and he had a huge smile on his face. But the next day, Mikey came home with even larger marks on his fists. There was red on his t-shirt, and it didn't seem like it was his. Panic filled my lungs. "Mikey, what happened?" "I did it, Daddy!" I stood up for myself again. I was so shocked I couldn't even move. "Was it the kids again?" I asked, hoping for the best. "Nope. They were so scared they didn't come near me." I broke my pen and asked the girl beside me if she had one I could borrow. She said no, so I beat her up after school when no one was looking. I buried my face in my hands. It was at that point that I realized why "violence is never the answer" is such a strong cliche. "Daddy, why aren't you replying to me?" Mikey yelled, before punching me in the stomach so hard I fell to the floor. The impact sent me staggering backward until my shoulders hit the refrigerator, magnets and papers cascading to the floor around me. The cold linoleum pressed against my palms as I tried to catch my breath, each gasp painful and shallow. Mikey stood over me, his expression a mixture of confusion and lingering excitement, clearly not understanding the severity of what he'd just done. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the sudden silence, marking the seconds as I struggled to regain my composure. My stomach dropped to my feet as I heard the knock at the door 3 days later. Child Protective Services? At my door? I glanced back at Mikey, who was watching cartoons in the living room, oblivious to the potential nightmare unfolding. His laughter at the TV, a stark contrast to the dread filling my chest. The sound of knuckles against wood seemed unnaturally loud in our small apartment, cutting through the cheerful background noise of the cartoon characters singing about friendship. Through the peephole, I could see 2 people standing in the hallway, a woman in a navy blazer holding a clipboard, and a man with glasses wearing a button-down shirt. The peephole distorted their faces slightly, making their expressions difficult to read, but their professional attire and serious postures told me everything I needed to know. May I see some identification? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest, my heart hammering against my ribs. They both showed me their badges, the official emblems glinting in the afternoon light. Legitimate. This was really happening. The plastic ID cards they held up featured the state seal embossed in the corner, catching the light from our entryway fixture. The woman's photo showed her with shorter hair than she currently wore, while the man's looked recent. I studied the credentials carefully, noting the expiration dates and official signatures, my eyes scanning for any sign that this might be a mistake or, worse, some elaborate scam. Of course, come in, I said, stepping aside, trying to appear calm and collected. My son is in the living room. He has autism, so he might not understand what's happening. The woman, Tara, nodded, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes sharp and assessing. Her partner, a thin man with glasses who introduced himself as Darren Coleman, scribbled something on his clipboard, the scratch of his pen against paper unnervingly loud in the quiet hallway. The sound of their dress shoes against our worn carpet seemed invasive somehow, each step bringing them further into our private space. Tara's perfume, something floral and subtle, mixed with the lingering smell of the mac and cheese I'd made for Mikey's lunch. Darren's clipboard had several forms attached to it, the top one partially filled with neat handwriting, though I couldn't make out the specific words from where I stood. Their faces were professionally neutral, but I caught the subtle way Darren's eyes scanned our home, looking for signs of neglect or abuse, cataloging every detail. We received an anonymous report claiming physical abuse, Tara explained once we were seated at the kitchen table, her voice clinical, but not unkind. The report specifically mentioned bruising and aggressive behavior from your son that might indicate abuse at home. The kitchen chairs creaked slightly as we sat down, the sound unnervingly loud in the tense atmosphere. A fly buzzed against the window, repeatedly hitting the glass in its futile attempt to escape, the soft tapping creating an irregular rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. The folder Tara placed on the table had a series of colored tabs sticking out from the edges, organized in some system that probably made perfect sense to her, but looked ominous to me. The pieces clicked together instantly in my mind. Ms. Jenkins, Mikey's SNA. This was her retaliation for me complaining about the bullying situation. That's absolutely false, I said firmly, my hands clenched under the table to hide their trembling. My son has autism and a severe peanut allergy. He was bullied at school, forced to eat peanuts by other students. The school's special needs assistant was recently removed for neglecting him and manipulating him. I believe she made this report as revenge. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, the words coming out clear despite the dryness in my mouth. The afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen window cast long shadows across the table, highlighting the coffee stain on the wood that I'd never been able to completely remove. From the living room, I could hear the cartoon theme song ending and a new show beginning, the sudden change in volume making me flinch slightly. Darren's eyebrows raised slightly, the only crack in his professional demeanor. That's a serious accusation, he said, his pen poised above his notepad. I have recordings, I said, the lie slipping out before I could stop it, desperation making me reckless. The principal has them too. Ms. Jenkins was telling my son to keep quiet about bullying and threatening him. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I maintained eye contact with Darren, willing him to believe me. A car honked outside, the sound momentarily distracting all of us. The kitchen faucet dripped slowly, each drop hitting the stainless steel sink with a tiny ping that seemed to grow louder as the silence stretched between us. Tara's expression softened slightly, a flicker of sympathy crossing her face. We'll need to speak with your son alone, and we'll need to see any areas where he sleeps, eats, and bathes, she said, her tone gentler now. I nodded, though the thought of strangers questioning Mikey made my heart race, images of him lashing out in confusion flashing through my mind. Of course, but please understand, he's been through a lot recently. The thought of them questioning Mikey alone made my palms sweat, leaving damp prints on my jeans as I wiped them nervously. The refrigerator kicked on with a low hum, the sudden noise making Darren glance toward it briefly before returning his attention to his notes. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Mikey's profile illuminated by the television's changing colors, his expression rapt as he focused on the cartoon characters. I called Mikey over and introduced him to the visitors, explaining they wanted to ask him some questions. His eyes darted between them suspiciously, his body tense. Are you new teachers? He asked, his voice small and uncertain. No, we just want to talk to you about home and school, Tara said with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mikey's socks were mismatched, one blue with dinosaurs, one plain white, a detail that suddenly seemed important, as if it might somehow be used against me. His hair stuck up slightly in the back where he'd been leaning against the couch, and there was a small ketchup stain on his shirt collar from lunch. He stood with his weight shifted to one side, a posture he often adopted when feeling uncertain. I squeezed Mikey's shoulder reassuringly, feeling the tension in his small frame. It's okay, buddy. Just tell the truth, like we always do. As they spoke with Mikey in the living room, I paced in the kitchen, straining to hear their questions over the pounding of my own heart. They asked about his daily routine, if he ever got hurt at home, if he was ever scared of me. My heart pounded with each question, but I forced myself to stay calm. Panicking would only make things worse, and I needed to appear composed and in control. The kitchen linoleum felt cold through my socks as I paced back and forth. 7 steps one way, turn, 7 steps back, a repetitive pattern that gave me something to focus on besides my anxiety. I could hear the murmur of voices from the living room, but couldn't make out specific words, just the rise and fall of conversation, punctuated occasionally by Mikey's louder responses. The dishwasher we'd run at breakfast finished its cycle with a beep that made me jump, the sudden noise shattering my concentration. After interviewing Mikey, they inspected his bedroom, the bathroom, our kitchen. They opened the refrigerator, checked the medicine cabinet, looked at his clothes. I followed silently, answering their questions about his medication, his therapy, his school situation, providing documentation where I could. They noted the organized way Mikey's clothes were arranged by color in his dresser, the neat row of sensory toys on his shelf, the visual schedule posted on his wall. In the bathroom, Darren examined the prescription labels on Mikey's medications, writing down names and dosages in his notepad. Tara opened the refrigerator, noting the fresh fruits and vegetables, the prepared meals in stackable containers, the carton of Mikey's favorite chocolate milk positioned where he could reach it easily. "Mr. Anderson, do you have any support system?" Tara asked as they prepared to leave, her expression thoughtful. "Raising a child with special needs alone can be overwhelming." "I have friends who help," I said, thinking of Malik and his genuine love for my son. "And we're seeing a therapist now." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across our living room as they gathered their things, the golden light softening the clinical nature of their visit. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, the sound muffled through our apartment walls but still recognizable, a normal, everyday sound that seemed to emphasize how abnormal this situation was. Mikey had returned to watching TV, though I noticed he kept glancing over at us, monitoring the situation while pretending not to. Darren handed me a card, his expression unreadable. "We'll be following up. In the meantime, here are some resources for parents of children with special needs." After they left, I collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me like a wave. Mikey climbed into my lap, something he rarely did anymore, his weight comforting despite everything. "Are they going to take me away?" he whispered, his voice small and frightened. The business card Darren had given me was still clutched in my hand, the edges slightly bent from my tight grip. Mikey's body was warm against mine, his weight solid and reassuring. I could smell the apple shampoo in his hair and the faint scent of the laundry detergent on his clothes. The television continued playing in the background, the colorful characters now seeming surreal and out of place against the gravity of our situation. I hugged him tight, breathing in the scent of his hair. "No, buddy, no one is taking you away from me." But I wasn't entirely sure that was true, the uncertainty gnawing at me like a physical pain. The setting sun cast our living room in a warm orange glow that belied the coldness of fear spreading through my chest. Outside our window, I could see neighbors returning from work, car doors slamming and voices calling greetings, normal end-of-day sounds that highlighted how precarious our own situation had become. Mikey's fingers clutched at my shirt, creating small wrinkles in the fabric as he held on tightly, as if he too feared being separated. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My stomach still ached where Mikey had punched me, a purple bruise blooming across my abdomen, but the emotional pain cut deeper, leaving me hollow and drained. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying yesterday's CPS visit in my head, the caseworker's cold eyes, the way she'd looked at Mikey's room, the questions that implied I was somehow hurting my own son. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, creating striped patterns across my bedroom wall that shifted slightly with the gentle morning breeze. The house was quiet, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the street outside. My alarm clock showed 6:17 a.m., earlier than I needed to be up, but sleep had been elusive, coming in short, restless bursts throughout the night. My phone buzzed with a text from Malik. "How's little man today? You guys okay?" I texted back, "Managing. We'll call later." When I went to check on Mikey, I found him already awake, sitting cross-legged on his bed, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. He looked up when I entered, his eyes red-rimmed and puffy. The blue dinosaur sheets on his bed were rumpled and twisted, evidence of a restless night. His favorite stuffed triceratops lay forgotten on the floor instead of in its usual place of honor beside his pillow. The morning light coming through his window illuminated dust particles floating in the air between us, creating a strange, dreamlike quality to the scene. "I'm sorry I hit you, Daddy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I sat beside him, careful to leave some space between us, mindful of his need for personal space when he was upset. "I know you are, buddy, but we need to talk about why that can't happen again." The mattress dipped slightly under my weight, the springs creaking softly. Outside his window, a bird chirped insistently, the cheerful sound at odds with the somber mood in the room. On Mikey's desk, his homework lay neatly stacked, pencils arranged by size beside it, his usual orderly system still in place despite the chaos of his emotions. He nodded, looking down at his hands again, his fingers twisting together anxiously. "Am I in trouble?" "No," I said softly, resisting the urge to pull him into a hug, "but we need to figure some things out. How about pancakes for breakfast?" His pajama top had a small hole near the collar, a detail I hadn't noticed before. His hair stuck up in the back, uncombed and wild from sleep. On his bookshelf, the row of model dinosaurs stood in their usual formation, meticulously arranged from smallest to largest, a small island of order in our increasingly chaotic life. While making breakfast, the familiar routine of measuring and mixing soothing my frayed nerves, I called Dr. Lee's office and managed to get an emergency appointment for that afternoon. I also called work and explained I needed a few personal days. My boss wasn't thrilled, but he agreed when I mentioned it, involved my son, his gruff voice softening slightly. The pancake batter spattered slightly as I whisked it, tiny droplets landing on the counter and my hand. The butter sizzled when it hit the hot pan, filling the kitchen with its rich, comforting smell. Through the kitchen window, I could see our neighbor Mrs. Patel watering her plants on the balcony across the way, the normality of her morning routine somehow reassuring in its mundanity. Over Mickey Mouse pancakes, Mikey's favorite, the chocolate chip eyes and whipped cream smile bringing a small smile to his face, I tried to gauge where his head was at. "Buddy, can you tell me why you hit me yesterday?" I asked gently. The maple syrup pooled in the indentations of the pancake, creating tiny amber puddles that Mikey carefully avoided disturbing as he cut precise, equal-sized bites. Steam rose from my coffee mug, creating swirling patterns in the air between us. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background, marking the passing seconds of this difficult conversation. He pushed his pancake around in the syrup, not making eye contact, the scrape of his fork against the plate unnervingly loud in the quiet kitchen. "You didn't say anything. You were supposed to be happy," he mumbled. "Happy that you hurt someone who didn't hurt you first?" I pressed, keeping my voice gentle but firm. A drop of syrup fell from his fork onto the table, creating a sticky golden circle that he immediately tried to wipe away with his napkin, his movements precise and methodical. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled down the street, the mechanical whine of its hydraulic lift briefly drowning out the kitchen sounds. Mikey's glass of orange juice remained untouched, condensation forming a small ring of moisture on the table around its base. His lower lip trembled, a warning sign of impending tears. "But you were happy before." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I was relieved you weren't getting hurt anymore, but hurting others when they haven't hurt you is never okay, even if they don't give you what you want." Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust particles floating between us and casting a warm glow across the table. The refrigerator hummed in the background, a constant white noise that filled the silence as Mikey processed my words. His shoulders were hunched forward slightly, making him appear smaller than usual, more vulnerable. He didn't respond, just continued swirling his fork through the syrup, creating patterns that he stared at with intense focus. At Dr. Lee's office that afternoon, Mikey sat rigid in the colorful waiting room, refusing to play with the toys or look at books, his body language closed off and defensive. When the therapist called us in, he followed silently, his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. The waiting room walls were painted a cheerful yellow, decorated with framed children's artwork that Mikey would normally have studied with interest. The receptionist's fingers clicked rapidly on her keyboard, the sound mingling with the soft instrumental music playing through hidden speakers. Other parents and children came and went, their conversations creating a background murmur that seemed to increase Mikey's tension, his hands covering his ears occasionally when the volume rose too high. Dr. Lee was a calm woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes behind round glasses. She spoke directly to Mikey, not down to him, her voice warm but not condescending. "I understand you've been having a tough time lately," she said, settling into her chair across from us. Her office smelled faintly of lavender, probably from the small diffuser humming quietly on a shelf behind her desk. Soft, natural light filtered through sheer curtains, creating a calm atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the tension radiating from Mikey. A bookshelf lined one wall, filled with both professional texts and children's books, all neatly arranged by height. On her desk sat a small Zen garden, the sand raked into perfect parallel lines. Mikey stared at the floor, his sneakers scuffing against the carpet. "Your dad tells me some kids at school were very mean to you. That must have been scary," she continued, her voice gentle but matter-of-fact. A tiny nod, almost imperceptible. "And then you learned that hitting those kids made them stop." Another nod, slightly more definite. "But now you're hitting other people too, even when they haven't been mean to you." The carpet beneath Mikey's feet had a subtle geometric pattern that he traced with the toe of his sneaker, creating invisible lines as Dr. Lee spoke. A clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the passing seconds. Outside the window, tree branches swayed gently in the breeze, their shadows dancing across the floor in constantly changing patterns. Mikey's hands curled into fists on his lap, his knuckles white with tension. I tensed, ready to intervene, but Dr. Lee remained perfectly calm, her posture relaxed and open. "It feels powerful, doesn't it? Making people do what you want," she said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. The leather of the couch creaked slightly as I shifted my weight, prepared to move quickly if needed. Dr. Lee's desk lamp cast a warm glow that softened the clinical nature of the office, creating pools of light that contrasted with the darker corners of the room. A distant siren wailed somewhere in the city outside, the sound fading in and out as it moved farther away. Mikey's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise that she understood, that she had put into words what he couldn't express. He gave a hesitant nod, his fists unclenching slightly. "I get that," she said, leaning forward slightly. "When people hurt us, we want that feeling of power back. But there's a problem with using hitting to get power. Can you guess what it is?" The sudden eye contact was significant, a breakthrough in itself for Mikey, who often avoided direct gazes. A bird landed on the windowsill outside, its small form visible through the sheer curtains, adding a moment of natural distraction. Dr. Lee's bracelet made a soft jingling sound as she leaned forward, the silver charms catching the light. Mikey shrugged, his gaze dropping back to the floor. "It stops working," she said simply, her voice gentle but firm. "People get scared, then angry, then they stay away from you, or they hit back harder. Either way, you end up alone." The heating system clicked on, sending a gentle flow of warm air into the room that ruffled the edges of the papers on Dr. Lee's desk. Mikey's shoelace had come untied, the ends trailing on the carpet beneath his swinging foot. Outside in the hallway, muffled footsteps passed by, someone walking briskly toward another office. I watched Mikey's face as he processed this, the subtle shifts in his expression as her words sank in. Something seemed to click behind his eyes, a flicker of understanding. After the session, Dr. Lee spoke with me privately, while Mikey waited in the play area, his fingers methodically sorting colored blocks by size and shape. Through the observation window, I could see Mikey arranging the blocks with intense concentration, his movements precise and methodical. The play area was designed to be soothing, soft colors, rounded edges, natural materials, a stark contrast to the harsh fluorescent lighting and institutional feel of the school where so many of his problems had started. A small fountain bubbled quietly in one corner, the gentle sound of water creating a calming white noise. He's experiencing a power reversal, she explained, her voice low but clear. After being victimized, he's discovered he can be the aggressor instead. It's actually a common response to bullying, especially in children who struggle with emotional regulation. How do we fix it? I asked desperately, the weight of responsibility pressing down on me like a physical burden. Dr. Lee's office had several framed credentials on the wall behind her desk, the official seals and signatures catching the light as she shifted in her chair. Her notepad had neat, compact writing covering half a page, observations from our session that I couldn't quite read from my position. A family photo sat on her desk, turned slightly away from visitors, a glimpse of her personal life carefully separated from her professional one. It will take time, she warned, her expression serious. We need to teach him alternative ways to feel powerful and in control, and he needs to see that violence has consistent negative consequences, while positive behaviors have rewards. We set up twice-weekly appointments, and she gave me strategies to try at home, visual schedules, social stories about appropriate responses, calm-down techniques. As we left, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since this nightmare began, a tiny spark in the darkness. The folder of materials she gave me was heavy in my hands, filled with printed worksheets, visual aids, and strategy guides. The late afternoon sun slanted through the office windows, creating long shadows in the hallway as we made our way to the exit. In the reception area, the same soft music played, creating a sense of continuity that was somehow reassuring. Mikey walked beside me, quieter than usual, but seeming less tense than when we'd arrived. That hope dimmed the next morning when the school called. Principal Winters wanted to see me immediately regarding an incident with Mikey. My stomach dropped, acid burning in my throat. What had he done now? The phone's ring had cut through the morning quiet like an alarm, startling me as I prepared Mikey's lunch. The peanut butter sandwich I'd been making for myself sat half-finished on the counter, abandoned as I answered the call. The principal's voice had that carefully controlled tone that administrators use when delivering bad news, each word measured and precise. When we arrived at her office, Mrs. Winters looked grim, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mr. Anderson, Mikey threw a chair during math class today. It shattered the whiteboard. We're going to have to suspend him. Principal Winters' office smelled faintly of coffee and the lemony scent of cleaning products. Awards and certificates lined the walls, testament to her professional achievements that now seemed at odds with her inability to protect my son. Her desk was neat and organized, with family photos arranged precisely on one corner, happy, smiling faces that contrasted sharply with her current stern expression. The chair I sat in was uncomfortable by design, keeping visitors from staying too long. I glanced at Mikey, who sat sullenly in the chair beside me, his expression closed off. "What happened, buddy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "The numbers were too hard," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "The teacher wouldn't help me." Mikey's feet barely touched the floor from the adult-sized chair, his legs swinging slightly in the empty space. His backpack sat beside him, the zipper partially open, revealing crumpled papers inside, unusual for my normally organized son. There was a small tear in the knee of his jeans that hadn't been there this morning, a fresh scrape visible through the opening. Mrs. Winters sighed, the sound weary and resigned. Ms. Patterson asked him to wait while she helped another student. He became agitated and threw the chair before she could get to him. 3 days. That's how long the suspension would last. As we drove home, the silence in the car thick and uncomfortable, I tried to make it clear this wasn't a vacation. "This is serious, Mikey. Throwing furniture could hurt someone badly." The car's air conditioning hummed softly, creating a background noise that emphasized rather than broke the tense silence between us. Outside the window, normal life continued. People walking dogs, mail carriers delivering packages, construction workers repairing a section of sidewalk, all oblivious to our private crisis. The dashboard clock showed 10:37 a.m., a time when Mikey should have been safely in class, learning math instead of sitting beside me, suspended and silent. He stared out the window, his reflection in the glass showing a blank expression. No one helps me there. That evening, I called Malik and filled him in on everything. The CPS visit, the therapy session, the suspension, my voice breaking as I recounted the events of the past few days. "Damn," he said, the word heavy with concern. "Little man's really struggling." I paced the kitchen as I talked, the phone pressed tightly against my ear, occasionally glancing into the living room to check on Mikey. The evening had turned cool, and I could see my breath fogging the kitchen window slightly when I stood close to it. The dishes from dinner sat in the sink, unwashed, a small sign of how overwhelmed I was feeling, as I normally cleaned up immediately after meals. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, the confession painful, but necessary. I feel like I created this monster by trying to protect him. Hey, Malik's voice sharpened, the word like a slap. Mikey's not a monster. He's a kid who's been through hell. You did what you thought was right. The kitchen light flickered slightly, a problem I'd been meaning to fix for weeks, but hadn't found time for. Outside, a car door slammed, followed by the sound of laughter as neighbors returned home. These normal, everyday sounds seemed to emphasize how far from normal our situation had become. The refrigerator hummed steadily, a constant background noise that filled the brief silences in our conversation. And now my son is punching me and throwing chairs at school, I said, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. So you figure out how to fix it, Malik said simply, his tone matter of fact. You're his dad, that's the job. The digital clock on the microwave showed 8:47 p.m., the glowing green numbers a reminder of how late it was getting. Through the doorway, I could see Mikey on the couch, his face illuminated by the blue light of the television, his expression unreadable from this distance. The house creaked and settled around us, the familiar sounds of our home continuing despite the turmoil of our lives. During Mikey's suspension, I kept him on a strict schedule, the structure helping both of us navigate this new reality. Mornings were for schoolwork sent home by his teachers, the familiar routine of math and reading providing some normalcy. Afternoons included therapy with Dr. Lee and activities to help with emotional regulation, deep breathing exercises, sensory activities with rice or water, and physical exercise to burn off energy, the backyard becoming an obstacle course of sorts. I created a visual schedule with colorful cards showing each activity of the day, posting it on the refrigerator where Mikey could easily see and reference it. The kitchen table became our classroom, scattered with worksheets, pencils, and textbooks during the morning hours. The living room floor was transformed into a sensory space, with bins of rice, containers of water beads, and kinetic sand that Mikey could manipulate when feeling overwhelmed. In the backyard, I set up stations for jumping, running, and throwing soft balls at targets, safe ways to channel his physical energy. On the second day, Mikey had a meltdown when I asked him to practice writing, the simple request triggering an explosion of frustration. He threw his pencil at me, narrowly missing my eye, then knocked over a lamp, the crash as it hit the floor making both of us jump. Mikey! I grabbed his arms gently but firmly, careful not to hurt him, but needing to stop the destruction. Stop this right now. The pencil made a soft thudding sound against the wall before falling to the carpet. The lamp lay broken on the floor, ceramic base shattered into jagged pieces, the light bulb miraculously intact, but the shade dented on one side. Mikey's face was flushed red with anger, his breathing rapid and shallow, tears streaming down his cheeks, leaving wet tracks that glistened in the afternoon light from the window. His worksheet lay crumpled on the table, the paper torn slightly where he had pressed too hard with his pencil. He struggled against me, his face red with anger, tears streaming down his cheeks. I don't want to! You can't make me! He screamed, his voice raw with emotion. This isn't how we behave, I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart, forcing calm into my tone. We don't throw things when we're upset. His small body trembled with emotion, muscles tense under my gentle restraint. I could feel his rapid heartbeat, his chest rising and falling with each angry breath. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the seconds of this crisis. Outside, a lawnmower droned in the distance, the mundane sound a stark contrast to the emotional storm happening in our living room. He stopped struggling and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, calculating, almost cold, so at odds with his usual demeanor that it sent a chill down my spine. The kids at school are scared of me now. Nobody bothers me, he said, his voice suddenly calm and flat. The abrupt shift from emotional outburst to this eerie calmness was jarring. His eyes, usually expressive and bright, had taken on a flat, evaluating quality that seemed alien in his young face. The tears on his cheeks were still wet, creating an unsettling contrast with his now composed expression. A car honked outside, the sound barely registering as I tried to process this new, disturbing development. A chill ran down my spine, ice spreading through my veins. I realized then that Mikey had learned something dangerous, that fear gave him power, that intimidation worked, that violence got him what he wanted. That night, after Mikey went to bed, the house quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. I searched online for therapists who specialized in autism and behavioral issues. I found several options and made a list, determined to get Mikey the help he needed, to undo the damage I had inadvertently caused. The blue light from my laptop screen illuminated the kitchen table where I sat, casting strange shadows on the walls. Outside, rain had started to fall, droplets tapping gently against the windows and creating rivulets that distorted the view of the streetlights. My coffee had gone cold, forgotten as I immersed myself in research, the mug leaving a ring on the table that I absently wiped away with my sleeve. The clock showed 1:17 a.m., but sleep felt impossible with so much at stake. When Mikey returned to school after his suspension, things seemed better at first. No calls from the principal, no new injuries on his hands, no incidents reported by his teachers. But then, a week later, I got another call, the principal's number flashing on my screen making my heart sink. This time, Mikey had kicked a boy named Thomas during lunch because Thomas had sat in his spot. The territorial aggression, a new and troubling development. I was at work when the call came, standing in the warehouse surrounded by towering shelves of inventory. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, creating a background hum that made it difficult to hear the principal's carefully measured words. My co-workers moved around me, forklifts beeping as they backed up, boxes being stacked and sorted, all oblivious to the crisis unfolding in my personal life. As I stood frozen, phone pressed to my ear. The principal's tone was much less sympathetic this time, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Mr. Anderson, we're running out of options here. If Mikey can't control his aggressive behavior, we may need to discuss alternative placement." Alternative placement was code for removing him from mainstream classes entirely, segregating him from his peers, labeling him as too difficult, too dangerous. I felt sick, bile rising in my throat. Her words echoed in my head, the clinical terminology failing to disguise the harsh reality of what she was suggesting. The break room where I'd retreated for privacy smelled of microwave popcorn and coffee, ordinary scents that seemed surreal against the gravity of our conversation. Through the small window, I could see the parking lot, cars neatly lined up under the bright midday sun, the normality of the scene a stark contrast to the turmoil I felt inside. "Please, he has an appointment with a behavioral therapist next week. Can you give us a little more time?" I pleaded, desperation making my voice crack. She agreed, reluctantly, but I could tell her patience was wearing thin, the clock ticking on Mikey's time in regular classes. My hands shook slightly as I ended the call, the phone feeling unnaturally heavy in my grip. The industrial clock on the break room wall showed 1:45 p.m., hours left in my shift, but my mind was already racing ahead to picking up Mikey, to the difficult conversation we would need to have, to the uncertain future stretching before us. The refrigerator in the corner hummed loudly, the mechanical sound filling the silence as I tried to collect my thoughts. At our first session with Dr. Lee, Mikey refused to speak, his silence a wall between him and help. He sat in the colorful office, staring at the therapist with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, his body language closed and defensive. Dr. Lee tried various approaches, toys, drawing, simple games, but Mikey remained silent, watching her with that same calculating look I'd seen at home, assessing her for weaknesses. The office seemed smaller somehow with the tension filling it, the cheerful decorations and comfortable furniture at odds with the emotional standoff taking place. Rain pattered against the windows, creating a soothing background rhythm that failed to relax either Mikey or me. Dr. Lee's voice remained calm and gentle as she tried different approaches, her professional demeanor never cracking despite Mikey's stubborn resistance. "This isn't unusual for a first session," Dr. Lee assured me afterward, her smile encouraging despite the lack of progress. "Let's try again next week." But the next session went the same way, and the one after that, Mikey's resistance a fortress that seemed impenetrable. Each session followed a similar pattern, Mikey sitting rigidly in his chair, refusing to engage, while Dr. Lee patiently tried various techniques to break through his silence. The waiting room became familiar, the same magazines on the table, the same watercolor paintings on the walls, the same receptionist greeting us with a sympathetic smile that grew more pitying with each visit. The drive to and from the office was filled with tense silence, Mikey staring out the window while I struggled to find words that might reach him. Dr. Lee suggested I stay in the waiting room for the fourth session, thinking Mikey might open up without me there, might feel more comfortable speaking freely. When I picked him up afterward, Dr. Lee looked troubled, lines of concern etched around her eyes. "He spoke today," she said quietly, "but only to tell me that he didn't need help, and that people leave him alone now that they know what happens if they don't." The waiting room had been torturous, 45 minutes of flipping through magazines without absorbing a single word, checking my watch every few minutes, straining to hear any sound from behind the closed door of Dr. Lee's office. Other parents came and went with their children, some offering sympathetic smiles that suggested they recognized the anxiety of waiting while your child was in therapy. The receptionist had offered me coffee, which sat untouched on the side table, growing cold as I waited. My heart sank, a stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. "What should I do?" "Keep bringing him," she said firmly, her conviction unwavering. "This will take time, but I'm concerned about the reinforcement he's getting from intimidating others. Has anything happened recently that might have triggered this change?" Dr. Lee's office was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, dust motes dancing in the sunbeams that streamed through the window. Her desk was organized but lived in, with stacks of files neatly arranged, and a half-empty water glass leaving a ring on a coaster. The wall clock ticked softly, marking the passing seconds as we discussed my son's troubling behavior, each tick a reminder of how time was passing, while Mikey remained stuck in this dangerous pattern. I hesitated, then told her about the bullies and the peanuts, the forced consumption of his allergen, though I left out the part about Malik's juvie friends, that particular detail too incriminating to share. She nodded thoughtfully, her expression grave. Mikey experienced trauma, and now he's trying to ensure it never happens again by becoming the aggressor. It's not uncommon, but it's concerning, especially given his difficulty understanding social boundaries. As I spoke, Dr. Lee took notes in a leather-bound notebook, her handwriting neat and compact. Outside her office window, the branches of a maple tree swayed gently in the breeze, casting moving shadows across the carpet. The tissue box on the small table between us remained untouched, though I felt the sting of tears threatening several times as I recounted what Mikey had endured. The next day, I got called into the principal's office again, the familiar walk down the school's hallway feeling like a march to execution. This time, it wasn't about Mikey hitting someone. It was worse. Much worse. Mikey threw a chair during class today, Mrs. Winters said, her face grim, lines of stress visible around her mouth. It hit the whiteboard and shattered it. Glass went everywhere. We're lucky no one was hurt. The school hallway smelled of floor cleaner and cafeteria food, the scents mingling into that distinctive school smell that normally evoked nostalgia, but now only increased my anxiety. The walls were lined with student artwork and motivational posters that seemed to mock our situation with their cheerful messages about perseverance and teamwork. The principal's office door had a small window through which I could see Mikey sitting inside, his legs swinging, not reaching the floor from the adult-sized chair. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me lightheaded and cold. I don't understand. He was doing better. Ms. Jenkins, the SNA, sat across from me, her expression cold and unsympathetic, arms crossed defensively over her chest. With all due respect, Mr. Anderson, Mikey is becoming a danger to other students and staff. We've tried working with him, but his behavior is escalating. Principal Winter's office was uncomfortably warm, the heating system clearly set too high for the mild spring day outside. A potted plant in the corner looked slightly wilted, its leaves drooping in the artificial heat. Ms. Jenkins wore a blue blouse with a coffee stain barely visible on the sleeve, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the harsh lines of her face. The clock on the wall seemed to tick unnaturally loudly in the tense atmosphere, each second punctuated by its mechanical click. He's been through a lot, I argued, anger flaring hot in my chest. Those bullies traumatized him by forcing him to eat something that could have culled him. And we addressed that, Mrs. Winters said, her tone placating but firm. Those students were disciplined, but Mikey's response has gone far beyond self-defense. My voice echoed slightly in the office, louder than I'd intended, causing Mikey to look up briefly, before returning his attention to picking at a loose thread on his shirt sleeve. Outside in the hallway, a class walked by, their shuffling footsteps and whispered conversations creating a momentary distraction. The sun had shifted, casting different shadows across the desk between us, highlighting the scratches and wear on its wooden surface. We're recommending placement in our specialized behavioral program, Ms. Jenkins added, a note of finality in her voice. It's a separate classroom with more structure and supervision. I felt cornered, trapped with no good options. Can I have some time to think about it? I asked, buying time to figure out my next move. Ms. Jenkins had a folder open in front of her, Mikey's name clearly visible on the label, the thickness of the file a visual representation of all the problems they documented. Her pen tapped rhythmically against the desk as she waited for my response, the sound grating on my already frayed nerves. Through the window behind her, I could see children playing on the playground, their carefree laughter carrying faintly through the glass, a painful reminder of the normal childhood experiences Mikey was missing. They agreed to give me the weekend to decide, the deadline hanging over me like a guillotine blade. As I left the office, I noticed Ms. Jenkins watching me with an odd expression, almost smug, like she'd won something, her satisfaction at my distress barely concealed. The hallway felt longer on the way out, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing faintly, creating a slight headache behind my eyes. Mikey walked beside me, unusually quiet, his backpack hanging from one shoulder instead of properly on both as I'd taught him. A janitor was mopping the floor near the exit, the sharp smell of cleaning solution stinging my nostrils as we passed. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright after the artificial lighting of the school, momentarily blinding as we stepped into the parking lot. That night, I heard Mikey crying in his room, the sound muffled but unmistakable. I found him curled up in bed, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, his face wet with tears that glistened in the dim light from the hallway. What's wrong, buddy? I sat on the edge of his bed, the mattress dipping under my weight. His dinosaur nightlight cast soft blue shadows across the room, creating a gentle atmosphere that contrasted with his distress. The window was slightly open, allowing in the distant sounds of traffic and the occasional dog barking somewhere in the neighborhood. His bookshelf was neatly organized as always, the spines of his favorite dinosaur books aligned perfectly, his small attempt to create order in a world that must seem increasingly chaotic to him. Between sobs, he managed to say, "I don't want to go to the special room," his voice small and frightened. I frowned, confusion mixing with concern. "How do you know about that? Did someone tell you?" He nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve, leaving a damp streak across the fabric. "Ms. Jenkins said I'm going to the bad kid room because I'm too much trouble." His pajamas were slightly too small, the sleeves riding up to expose his wrists, a reminder that he was growing despite all our troubles. The stuffed dinosaur he clutched was worn from years of love, its fabric thin in spots, one eye slightly loose, a constant companion through good times and bad. Outside, a car drove by, its headlights briefly illuminating the room through the thin curtains, creating moving shadows that danced across the ceiling. Anger flared in my chest, hot and fierce. The school hadn't even finalized this decision, and Mrs. Jenkins was already telling Mikey, using it to frighten him. "She said if I tell you about the new kids, she'll tell everyone I made it up," he continued, his voice small and trembling. "She gives me candy to not tell." The revelation hit me like a physical blow, making my stomach clench with a mixture of rage and concern. Mikey's room was warm despite the open window, the heating vent near his bed pumping out hot air that made the atmosphere feel stifling. His alarm clock glowed 9:47 p.m. in red digital numbers, well past his usual bedtime, explaining the extra emotional vulnerability. "What new kids, Mikey?" I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "The big kids who take my lunch. They push me in the bathroom," Ms. Jenkins sees but doesn't stop them. He looked up at me, his eyes red from crying, vulnerable and afraid. She says no one believes someone like me. His words hung in the air between us, devastating in their simplicity. A car alarm went off somewhere in the distance, its rhythmic wailing creating an appropriate soundtrack to the moment of revelation. Mikey's breathing was still uneven from crying, little hiccuping breaths that made his whole body shudder. The stuffed dinosaur was clutched so tightly in his hands that its fabric was stretched and distorted, showing the strain of his grip. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me, leaving me falling through empty space. All this time, I thought Mikey's aggression was coming from nowhere, was an overreaction to past trauma, but he was still being bullied, and the person who was supposed to protect him was part of the problem, was actively enabling his tormentors. The realization made me dizzy, the room seeming to tilt slightly as I processed this new information. The night sounds from outside, distant traffic, the neighbor's television, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, all seemed suddenly muffled, as if I was hearing them through water. Mikey's bookshelf, with its perfectly arranged dinosaur figures and books, stood as a testament to his desire for order in a world that had become increasingly chaotic and threatening. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, buddy?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice gentle despite the rage building inside me. "She said you'd get mad at me again, and they'd take me away from you," he whispered, the fear in his voice breaking my heart. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen as he spoke, the corners growing darker as if reflecting the gravity of his words. His small hands twisted in the fabric of his dinosaur pajamas, creating wrinkles that matched the worry lines on his young face. The heating system clicked off suddenly, leaving a silence that emphasized each of Mikey's shaky breaths. I hugged him tight, fury and heartbreak mixing in my chest like a volatile chemical reaction. "No one is taking you away from me, Mikey, I promise." His body felt small and fragile in my arms, his bones seemingly delicate beneath my protective embrace. His hair smelled of the apple shampoo he insisted on using, the familiar scent now a poignant reminder of his childhood innocence. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of the tree near his window, creating moving shadows across his bedroom wall that seemed to dance in rhythm with my racing thoughts. The next day was Saturday, the weekend stretching before us with the decision about Mikey's schooling looming over everything. While Mikey watched cartoons, the colorful characters on screen a temporary distraction from his troubles, I called Malik and explained what was happening, the words tumbling out in a rush of anger and fear. Morning sunlight streamed through the living room windows, creating bright patches on the carpet where dust motes danced in the air. The sound of the cartoon's cheerful theme song created a bizarre soundtrack to my serious phone conversation, the contrast between the show's happy world and our reality jarring. Mikey sat cross-legged on the floor, closer to the TV than I usually allowed, his focus complete, temporarily transported away from his troubles. "That's messed up," he said, his voice hard with anger. "What are you going to do?" "I need evidence. No one's going to believe Mikey over this SNA without proof," I said, pacing the kitchen as I spoke, unable to stay still with the energy of my rage. The linoleum floor was cool beneath my bare feet as I paced back and forth, 7 steps one way, turn, 7 steps back, a repetitive pattern that helped me think. Through the doorway, I could keep an eye on Mikey, making sure he was still absorbed in his cartoon and not listening to my conversation. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, forgotten during my angry explanation to Malik, a thin film forming on its surface. "You could record her," Malik suggested. The solution so simple I wondered why I hadn't thought of it. Get her to admit what she's doing. It wasn't a bad idea, risky, but potentially effective. I spent the weekend researching recording laws in our state and planning what to say to Ms. Jenkins, how to approach her without raising suspicion. The laptop screen glowed in the dimness of the kitchen as night fell, illuminating my face as I scrolled through legal websites and forums. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the hum of the refrigerator, Mikey having gone to bed hours earlier. My notes filled several pages of a yellow legal pad, the paper covered with my increasingly messy handwriting as fatigue set in, but determination kept me working. On Monday morning, I sent Mikey to school with a small voice recorder hidden in his backpack, with instructions to keep it near him when Ms. Jenkins was around. The device small enough to go unnoticed, but powerful enough to pick up conversations. The recorder was barely larger than a USB drive, its black plastic case disappearing easily into the front pocket of Mikey's backpack. I showed him where it was, but instructed him not to touch it or mention it to anyone, a secret mission that he seemed to understand the importance of, despite his age. The morning was crisp and clear, sunlight glinting off car windows in the school parking lot as I dropped him off, watching his small figure walk through the double doors with more courage than many adults would have shown. When I picked him up that afternoon, my hands shook as I retrieved the recorder, anticipation and dread making my movements clumsy. After Mikey went to bed, I listened to it, the earbuds delivering the sounds of his day directly to my ears. The kitchen was silent except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator as I sat at the table, earbuds in, listening intently. The digital display of the microwave showed 10:37 p.m., the green numbers the only illumination besides my laptop screen. A cup of tea sat cooling beside me, forgotten in my concentration, a thin skin forming on its surface as the minutes ticked by. Most of it was just classroom noise, the ambient sounds of learning, but then I heard it, Ms. Jenkins speaking to Mikey during a quiet moment, her voice distinct among the background noise. "Remember our deal?" her voice said, low but clear, the threat unmistakable. If you tell anyone about our special arrangement, I'll make sure they know how difficult you really are. No one wants a troublemaker like you in their class. The recording quality was surprisingly good, capturing not just her words, but the menacing tone behind them. In the background, I could hear the muffled sounds of children in the hallway, the closing of a distant door, the squeak of a chair being moved, ordinary school sounds that created a surreal backdrop to the manipulation being captured. Mikey's small voice replied, plaintive and scared, I want my daddy. Your daddy can't help you here, she said, her tone suddenly harsh, the mask of professionalism slipping to reveal the cruelty beneath. He's the one who taught you to be violent, isn't he? That's what everyone thinks. Hearing my son's frightened voice through the earbuds made my chest tighten with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too confining, as if the walls were closing in with each damning word from the recording. Outside, a car drove by, its headlights briefly illuminating the room through the window, creating moving shadows that seemed to dance in rhythm with my increasing anger. My blood boiled, rage making my vision blur at the edges. I listened to more recordings over the next 2 days, gathering evidence of Ms. Jenkins' manipulation and neglect. She was deliberately ignoring when other students bothered Mikey, then bribing him to stay quiet about it, her behavior so far beyond unprofessional that it bordered on abusive. Each recording was worse than the last, revealing a pattern of deliberate neglect and emotional manipulation that made my hands shake with anger. I created a detailed log of each incident, noting times, dates, and exact quotes, the pages filling with damning evidence. The kitchen table became command central, covered with notes, the recorder, and my laptop. Everything organized with the precision of someone building a case. On Thursday, I requested a meeting with the principal, bringing the recordings with me, the evidence securely backed up in multiple places. Mrs. Winters listened, her expression growing more shocked with each clip, her professional composure cracking as the extent of Ms. Jenkins' misconduct became clear. The principal's office felt different this time. I was no longer on the defensive but armed with irrefutable evidence. The leather chair creaked slightly as I shifted position, leaning forward to make sure Mrs. Winters could hear each damning word clearly. Outside her window, children played on the playground, their carefree laughter a stark contrast to the serious conversation taking place. The recorder sat between us on her desk, small but powerful, like a tiny bomb detonating Ms. Jenkins' career. I had no idea, she said when I finished, genuine distress in her voice. This is completely unacceptable. I want her away from my son, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. And I want those new bullies identified and dealt with properly. Mrs. Winters' normally perfect composure had slipped, her face pale with shock, a slight tremor visible in her hand as she reached for her water glass. The afternoon sun streamed through her office window, highlighting the dust particles floating in the air between us, creating an almost surreal atmosphere for this moment of reckoning. The school bell rang in the distance, signaling the end of a period, the normal rhythm of the school day continuing despite the bombshell I'd just dropped. Of course, she agreed without hesitation. I'll handle Ms. Jenkins immediately. But Mr. Anderson, this doesn't completely explain Mikey's aggressive behavior, the chair throwing, the hitting. He's been pushed to his breaking point, I explained, leaning forward to emphasize my point. He learned that violence works because we accidentally taught him that. I'm working with a therapist to help him unlearn it, but it will take time. The clock on her wall ticked loudly in the momentary silence that followed my explanation, each second punctuated by its mechanical click. A framed teaching certificate hung slightly crooked on the wall behind her desk, the imperfection somehow humanizing in this moment of serious discussion. Through the thin walls, we could hear the muffled sounds of a classroom nearby, a teacher's voice, children responding in unison, the normal sounds of education continuing despite our crisis. Mrs. Winters nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. I understand. We'll put a pause on the specialized placement decision and assign a different SNA to work with Mikey. That evening, Mikey seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from his small shoulders. Ms. Jenkins wasn't at school today, he told me as we ate dinner. Spaghetti twirled around his fork. The new lady is nice. She helped me with my math. Steam rose from our plates, carrying the rich scent of tomato sauce and herbs throughout the kitchen. The overhead light created a warm, golden glow that softened the edges of our small dining area. Outside, rain had started to fall, droplets tapping gently against the windows, creating a soothing background rhythm to our conversation. Mikey's face looked more relaxed than it had in weeks, the worried furrow between his eyebrows finally smoothed away. I smiled, relief washing over me in a warm wave. That's great, buddy. But our troubles weren't over. Far from it. The next morning, there was another knock at our door, the sound sending a jolt of anxiety through me. My heart sank when I saw Tara from CPS again, this time alone, her expression unreadable as she stood on our doorstep. The peephole distorted her face slightly, making her appear wider than she was, but there was no mistaking the professional blazer and clipboard that had become symbols of potential disaster in my mind. The hallway behind her was empty, no sign of her partner from the previous visit. The morning sun created a halo effect around her figure, the bright light making it difficult to read her expression clearly, until I opened the door. Mr. Anderson, she said with a professional nod, I need to follow up on our previous visit. May I come in? I let her in, trying to project calm confidence despite my anxiety, my palms damp with nervous sweat. Mikey was napping in his room after an exhausting therapy session, the emotional toll of recent events leaving him drained. The living room was tidier than usual, as if the universe had granted me this small mercy before another official inspection. Tara's heels clicked against the hardwood floor of the entryway, the sound sharp and official. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating dust particles floating in the air, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that seemed at odds with the tension of the moment. "We've been reviewing your case," she said, once we were seated at the kitchen table, her voice neutral. "The anonymous report contained some serious allegations, but we found no evidence to support them." Relief flooded through me, so intense it made me dizzy. "So the case is closed?" The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed my question, each second stretching out as I waited for her response. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, the sound muffled through the apartment walls. Tara's clipboard sat on the table between us, the papers clipped to it facing her, preventing me from reading what was written there. "Not officially yet," she said, holding up a hand to temper my optimism. "But I wanted to let you know that things are looking positive. Dr. Lee sent us her assessment, which was very helpful." I nodded, grateful for Dr. Lee's support, making a mental note to thank her at our next session. A beam of sunlight fell across the kitchen table, highlighting the scratches and wear from years of use, each mark telling a story of our life together. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the background, a constant white noise that somehow made the conversation feel more serious. Tara's wedding ring caught the light as she flipped through her notes, the gold band glinting briefly. "However," Tara continued, her tone shifting slightly, "we are concerned about Mikey's school situation. Keeping him out of school for an extended period could be problematic." "I'm looking into alternative schools," I explained, wanting her to know I was being proactive, "and documenting everything that's happened at his current school. His SNA was emotionally abusive and neglected to protect him from bullying." The words came out more forcefully than I'd intended, my frustration with the school situation bleeding into my tone. A car honked outside, the sound briefly distracting both of us. Through the kitchen window, I could see clouds gathering, suggesting rain later in the day, the changing weather mirroring the shifts in our situation. Tara's expression softened slightly, a flicker of sympathy crossing her face. "That's concerning. Have you filed a formal complaint?" "Not yet," I admitted, realizing I should have done so already. "I've been focused on stabilizing Mikey first." The admission felt like revealing a weakness, though Tara's expression showed understanding rather than judgment. The kitchen chair creaked slightly as I shifted position, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. From down the hallway came the faint sound of Mikey turning over in his sleep, the bed springs squeaking softly. "I understand," she said, her tone gentler now, "but you should know that a formal complaint would create an official record, which could help if you need to request accommodations or transfers in the future." It was the second time someone had suggested formal action, the universe seemingly pushing me toward this path. Maybe they were right. Maybe official documentation was the way forward. Tara's pen made a soft scratching sound as she made a note on her form, the noise drawing my attention to her neat, compact handwriting. The kitchen light flickered briefly, a problem I'd been meaning to fix but hadn't found time for amid all our other issues. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of the tree near our window, creating moving shadows across the table between us. After Tara left, I started drafting a complaint letter to the school board and superintendent, the words flowing easily now that I had concrete evidence. I included every detail, the initial bullying with the peanuts, the video evidence, Ms. Jenkins' neglect and manipulation, the recordings, the CPS report I believed she filed in retaliation, and the information from Barbara about ongoing targeting of Mikey, leaving nothing out. The afternoon stretched into evening as I worked, the changing light outside the window marking the passing hours. My laptop keys clicked rhythmically as I typed, organizing the evidence into a compelling narrative. A cup of coffee sat beside me, growing cold and forgotten as I focused on the task, determined to create a document so thorough and well documented that it couldn't be ignored or dismissed. It took me 3 days to get it right, compiling all the evidence, dates, and details, making sure it was comprehensive and professional. When it was finished, I sent copies to the superintendent, every school board member, the district's legal department, and the State Department of Education. I also sent a copy to Barbara, a kindergarten teacher who had always been kind to Mikey, hoping she might share it with sympathetic staff members. Then I waited, the ball now in their court. The printer hummed as it produced multiple copies of the lengthy document, the stack of papers growing beside me. I organized each packet carefully, placing them in labeled envelopes, the methodical task helping to calm my nerves. The kitchen table was covered with papers, envelopes, and my notes, the physical manifestation of our struggle for justice. Outside, children played in the afternoon sunshine, their carefree laughter drifting through the open window, a reminder of what was at stake. A week passed with no response from the school district, the silence both frustrating and concerning. Mikey continued to improve at home, his aggressive outbursts decreasing with consistent therapy and clear boundaries, but I knew we couldn't continue like this indefinitely. I needed to work, and Mikey needed education and socialization beyond what I could provide. The calendar on the wall showed the passing days, each one marked with therapy appointments and home activities, but no school. The routine we'd established was working for now, mornings for academic work, afternoons for therapy and physical activity, but it wasn't sustainable long term. The pile of mail each day yielded bills, but no responses from the school district, the silence becoming more ominous with each passing day. I was researching homeschooling requirements when my phone rang, the school's number appearing on the screen making my heart race. It was Principal Winters, her voice tight and formal. "Mr. Anderson," she said, sounding strained. I've been instructed to inform you that Ms. Jenkins is no longer employed by our district. The homeschooling website remained open on my laptop, the screen glowing in the dim afternoon light as clouds gathered outside. My coffee mug was half empty, the liquid long since gone cold. The sudden call had startled me, causing me to knock over a stack of research papers that now lay scattered across the floor, their organization lost. I sat up straighter, a small victory, but significant nonetheless. I see. The district has reviewed your complaint and taken appropriate action, she continued, sounding like she was reading from a script prepared by the district's lawyers. We would like to discuss Mikey's return to school and the accommodations we can provide to ensure his safety and success. Her voice had that careful, measured quality that suggested she was choosing each word with precision, probably with legal counsel present or having reviewed her statement with them beforehand. The kitchen clock showed 3:47 p.m., close to when school would be letting out for the day. Through the window, I could see dark clouds gathering, promising rain later. I appreciate that, I said carefully, not wanting to commit to anything yet. But I'm not sure Westlake is the right environment for Mikey anymore. I understand your concerns, she said, her voice softening slightly, becoming more personal. But I want you to know that significant changes are being implemented. We're conducting a full review of our special education protocols, and several staff members have been required to attend additional training. The change in her tone was subtle but noticeable, a shift from administrative formality to something more genuine. Rain had started to fall outside, droplets tapping against the window in an irregular rhythm. From Mikey's room came the soft sounds of him playing with his dinosaur figures, complete with whispered roars and stomping noises, a moment of normal childhood amid our ongoing crisis. I wasn't entirely convinced, but I agreed to a meeting the following week to discuss possibilities, keeping my options open. After hanging up, I called Malik to share the news, needing to talk it through with someone who understood our situation. They fired her A's? He asked, sounding impressed and satisfied. Good. She deserved worse. Malik's voice boomed through the phone speaker, his satisfaction evident in every word. The rain had intensified, creating a soothing background noise that contrasted with the intensity of our conversation. Through the doorway, I could see Mikey still playing contentedly, arranging his dinosaurs in complex formations that made sense only to him, his face relaxed and focused in a way I hadn't seen in too long. Yeah, but I'm still not sure about sending Mikey back there, I said, voicing my lingering doubts. Trust your gut, Malik advised, his voice warm with concern. You know what's best for little man. The kitchen light cast a warm glow as evening approached, creating a cozy atmosphere that belied the seriousness of our conversation. Steam rose from the pot of pasta cooking on the stove, the familiar domestic task grounding me amid the uncertainty of our situation. Outside, the rain continued steadily, washing away the day's dust and grime, perhaps symbolically cleansing our situation as well. The next day, I received an unexpected call from Barbara Serenity, the kindergarten teacher who had always had a soft spot for Mikey. I wanted to let you know what's happening here, she said without preamble, her voice low as if she didn't want to be overheard. There's been a major shakeup. Ms. Jenkins is gone, and the principal called an emergency staff meeting about proper handling of bullying and special needs students. Barbara's voice had that hushed quality of someone speaking from a place they shouldn't be, probably an empty classroom during her planning period. In the background, I could hear the distant sounds of children playing, probably at recess, their shouts and laughter carrying through the school's open windows. The connection crackled slightly, as if she was moving around while speaking, perhaps pacing nervously. How are the other teachers taking it? I asked, curious about the internal reaction. Mixed reactions, she admitted with a sigh. But something interesting happened yesterday. Corey Thompson's mom came forward saying Ms. Jenkins had berated her son last year. Corey is nonverbal, so he couldn't tell anyone what was happening. The revelation sent a chill down my spine, confirming that Mikey wasn't an isolated case. I was standing in our kitchen, the phone pressed tightly to my ear, suddenly aware of the ticking clock and humming refrigerator, ordinary sounds continuing despite the extraordinary conversation. Outside, the mail carrier walked past our window, delivering the day's letters and packages, the mundane routine of life proceeding while systems were being shaken. So it wasn't just Mikey, I said, a weight lifting from my shoulders. Validation that I wasn't overreacting, that the problem was real and systemic. No, Barbara confirmed, her voice firm. I think your complaint opened the floodgates. The administration is scrambling to address everything before it becomes a bigger scandal. Her words carried both vindication and a sense of collective responsibility. Other children had suffered too, but perhaps Mikey's situation would lead to changes that would protect them all. The afternoon sun created patterns on the kitchen floor as it filtered through the blinds, the shifting light seeming to reflect the changes happening at the school. In the living room, Mikey was working on a puzzle, his face screwed up in concentration, unaware of how his story was affecting others. The meeting with Principal Winters was scheduled for Thursday, giving me time to prepare questions and demands. On Wednesday night, I sat down with Mikey to talk about it, wanting him to be part of the decision-making process. Buddy, tomorrow we're going to talk to your principal about maybe going back to school, I explained gently, keeping my tone casual to avoid alarming him. We sat at the kitchen table, the remains of dinner, chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs, Mikey's favorite, still on our plates. The evening light cast long shadows across the room, creating a calm, intimate atmosphere for our important conversation. Mikey had a smudge of ketchup on his chin that he hadn't noticed, a small, endearing detail that reminded me of his youth, despite all he'd been through. Mikey's face fell, his expression closing off immediately. I don't want to go back. They're mean there. Ms. Jenkins is gone now, I told him, reaching out to squeeze his hand reassuringly. She can't be mean to you anymore. His fingers were sticky with ketchup, warm and small in my larger hand. The refrigerator hummed in the background, a constant white noise that filled the silence as Mikey processed this information. Through the window, I could see our neighbor walking his dog, an ordinary evening routine continuing despite our personal crisis. But what about the other kids? He asked, his voice small and uncertain, eyes wide with worry. We're going to make sure you're protected, I promised, meaning every word. And if you don't feel safe, you don't have to go back. We'll find another school. He nodded, but didn't look convinced, doubt written clearly across his face. His dinosaur-patterned shirt had a small stain on the sleeve, probably from lunch, a normal childhood detail that somehow emphasized the abnormal situation he was facing. The kitchen light flickered briefly, another reminder of the small household tasks I'd been neglecting amid our larger crisis. Outside, the streetlights had come on, casting a warm glow through our window as evening settled in. The next morning, we met with Principal Winters, the new SNA assigned to Mikey, a kind-faced woman named Jacqueline Riley, and the school counselor, Thomas Nguyen, the four adults sitting around a conference table while Mikey explored a box of fidget toys in the corner. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and the lemon-scented cleaner used on the table. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds, creating striped patterns across the polished wood surface. A water pitcher sat in the center of the table, condensation forming on its plastic surface, glasses arranged neatly beside it. The walls were decorated with student artwork and motivational posters, creating a more welcoming atmosphere than the principal's office. Principal Winters started with an apology, her tone sincere. Mr. Anderson, Mikey, I want to sincerely apologize for what happened. We failed to provide the safe learning environment that every student deserves. Mikey sat beside me, fidgeting with a small stress ball I'd brought for him, his eyes fixed on its squishing form rather than on the adults discussing his future. Principal Winters looked different somehow, less formal, more human, with a genuine regret visible in her expression. Her usual perfectly pressed blazer was replaced by a more casual cardigan, perhaps a deliberate choice to create a less intimidating atmosphere. Mikey's legs swung beneath his chair, not quite reaching the floor, his sneakers occasionally bumping against the chair legs with a soft thud. We've made several changes, she continued, outlining their new approach. Ms. Riley will be Mikey's dedicated SNA, and she'll be with him throughout the day. We've also implemented new anti-bullying protocols and additional training for all staff. Ms. Riley smiled warmly at Mikey, her expression genuine and kind. I'm looking forward to working with you, Mikey. I heard you're really good at science. Ms. Riley had a soft voice with a slight southern accent, her words flowing like warm honey. She wore a colorful scarf with a dinosaur pattern that seemed deliberately chosen to connect with Mikey's interests. The folder in front of her was decorated with science-themed stickers, planets, beakers, and atoms, another thoughtful touch that suggested she had taken time to learn about Mikey before meeting him. Mikey didn't respond, but he stopped fidgeting momentarily, a small sign that he was listening despite his apparent disinterest. Mr. Nguyen explained the counseling support available, and Principal Winters outlined the new safety measures. It all sounded good, but I still had reservations, the memory of Mikey's distress too fresh to ignore. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the passing minutes of this important meeting. Outside the conference room window, I could see the playground where children would soon be enjoying recess, the swings moving slightly in the morning breeze. Mr. Nguyen had a gentle voice and expressive hands that moved as he spoke, his enthusiasm for the new support systems evident in every gesture. What about the students who were bullying Mikey? I asked, needing specific answers. And the staff who believed Ms. Jenkins' lies about us? Principal Winters shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly less prepared for this question. The students involved have received appropriate consequences and are being monitored closely. As for staff, we've addressed the importance of professionalism and not spreading unsubstantiated rumors. Her discomfort was visible in the way she adjusted her glasses and straightened papers that didn't need straightening. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, the sound becoming more noticeable during the momentary silence that followed my question. Through the thin walls, we could hear a class reciting something in unison, the rhythmic chanting a reminder of normal school activities continuing around us. Not entirely satisfying, but better than nothing. A start, at least. I appreciate all of this, I said, gathering my thoughts, but I need to discuss it with Mikey privately before making a decision. They agreed, and we left with promises to follow up soon, the ball now in our court. The hallway outside the conference room was empty, our footsteps echoing slightly on the polished floor. Mikey's hand found mine as we walked, a rare initiation of contact that spoke volumes about his anxiety level. Through classroom doors, we could see teachers instructing, students raising hands, the normal rhythm of education that Mikey had been missing. The main office secretary smiled at us as we passed, a small gesture of kindness that felt significant amid all the tension. In the car, I asked Mikey what he thought, wanting his input despite his young age. "Ms. Riley seems nice," he said after a moment of consideration, his voice thoughtful. "But I'm still scared." "I know, buddy. It's okay to be scared." I reached over and squeezed his hand, his small fingers warm in mine. The car's interior was warm from sitting in the morning sun, the familiar smell of the air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror mingling with the lingering scent of the granola bar Mikey had eaten on the way to the meeting. Through the windshield, we could see students arriving for the day, backpacks bouncing as they walked, some running to greet friends, others moving more slowly, reluctant to start the school day. "What if we try it for just one day? I'll stay at school with you the whole time. If it doesn't feel right, we'll look at other options." He considered this, his face scrunched in concentration. "You promise you'll stay?" "I promise," I said, meaning it completely. His seatbelt created a diagonal line across his dinosaur t-shirt, the fabric bunching slightly where the strap pressed against it. The school building loomed in the background through the car window, less threatening somehow after our productive meeting, but still representing uncertainty and potential stress. A school bus pulled up to the curb, disgorging a stream of children who moved like a colorful river toward the entrance. We agreed to try one day the following week, a test run to see if the changes were real or just talk. I arranged time off work and prepared Mikey as best I could, talking through what to expect and practicing coping strategies for anxiety, role-playing potential scenarios to build his confidence. The days leading up to the test run were filled with preparation. We created a visual schedule of the school day, reviewed calming techniques, and practiced phrases Mikey could use if he felt overwhelmed or needed help. Each evening, we role-played different scenarios, asking for help, dealing with difficult classmates, communicating with Ms. Riley, repeating them until Mikey felt comfortable with his responses. The kitchen table became our practice area, chairs arranged to mimic a classroom setting, the refrigerator humming quietly in the background as we worked. The trial day arrived, the morning crisp and clear. Walking into Westlake Elementary, I felt Mikey's hand tighten around mine, his palm slightly sweaty with nervousness. Several staff members greeted us warmly, perhaps too warmly, their smiles a bit forced and awkward, but Ms. Riley seemed genuinely kind, showing Mikey his desk and the sensory tools available to him, her manner respectful and patient. The school hallway smelled of floor cleaner and chalk dust, the familiar scents bringing back memories of my own school days. Sunlight streamed through the classroom windows, creating bright patches on the colorful carpet where small dust particles danced in the air. The walls were covered with student artwork and educational posters, creating a visually stimulating environment that Mikey scanned carefully, taking in every detail with his usual thoroughness. I stayed in the back of the classroom, watching like a hawk for any signs of trouble. Mikey was quiet but engaged, raising his hand occasionally to answer questions, his responses thoughtful when called upon. At lunch, we sat together at a table with two other students, whose parents had arranged for them to eat with Mikey. They were friendly kids, who seemed unbothered by Mikey's occasional stimming, accepting him without question. The classroom clock ticked steadily throughout the morning, marking the passing minutes of this crucial test. Ms. Riley moved around the room with quiet efficiency, providing support where needed, but giving students independence when appropriate. The lesson on habitats seemed to particularly interest Mikey, his focus complete, as the teacher explained how different animals adapted to their environments. At lunch, the cafeteria buzzed with conversation and the clatter of trays, the noise level carefully monitored by attentive staff members. No bullies approached, no peanuts appeared. Ms. Riley stayed nearby, attentive but not hovering, giving Mikey space while ensuring his safety. By the end of the day, Mikey seemed tired but not distressed, the day having gone better than either of us expected. The afternoon sun slanted through the classroom windows, creating long shadows across the desks as the school day wound down. Children packed up their belongings, the rustle of papers and zip of backpacks creating a symphony of end-of-day sounds. Mikey methodically organized his folder and notebooks, his movements precise and careful, a sign that he was managing his anxiety rather than being overwhelmed by it. In the car, I asked him how he felt, anxious to hear his assessment. "It was okay," he said, which from Mikey was high praise indeed. "Ms. Riley helped me with math, and nobody was mean." "Do you think you'd be okay going back tomorrow?" I asked carefully, not wanting to push but needing to know. "I wouldn't stay the whole day, but I could drop you off and pick you up." The afternoon traffic moved slowly around us, cars filled with parents and children heading home after the school day. Mikey's backpack sat between us on the console, slightly heavier with homework assignments, a normal, ordinary detail that suddenly seemed significant after so much abnormality. The car's air conditioning hummed softly, creating a private space for our important conversation. He thought about it, his face serious as he considered the question. Then he nodded slowly, a tentative agreement. "I think so. But what if the mean kids come back?" "Then you tell Ms. Riley or another teacher right away," I said firmly. "And you call me. I'll come get you immediately. No questions asked." His fingers traced patterns on the window glass, leaving temporary marks that faded quickly in the warm air. Outside, the world continued its normal rhythm. People walking dogs, mail carriers delivering packages, construction workers repairing a section of sidewalk, all oblivious to the momentous decision being made in our car. The traffic light ahead turned red, giving us a moment of stillness to continue our conversation. We agreed to try it, a cautious step forward. The next morning, I dropped Mikey off with only minor anxiety from both of us, his backpack seeming too large for his small frame as he walked into the school. When I picked him up, he was waiting with Ms. Riley, looking tired but calm. no signs of distress on his face. The morning drop-off had been quick but emotional, Mikey hesitating briefly at the school entrance before squaring his small shoulders and walking in with determined steps. Throughout the day, I kept my phone close, checking it frequently for any messages from the school, the hours passing with agonizing slowness. The afternoon pickup line formed early, parents and cars creating a snaking line through the parking lot, all waiting for their children with the same mixture of love and concern that filled my chest. "Good day?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual despite my anxiety. "Pretty good," he confirmed with a small nod. "We did science experiments." Ms. Riley smiled, her expression warm and approving. Mikey was a great lab partner, very precise with measurements. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the school parking lot as we talked, the day winding down around us. Mikey's hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly during the day, a habit when he was concentrating hard. Ms. Riley's science-themed lanyard held her ID badge, the small detail reinforcing her connection to Mikey's interests. Other children streamed past us toward waiting parents, their voices creating a backdrop of normal end-of-day excitement. Days turned into weeks, the routine becoming familiar and comfortable. Mikey gradually adjusted to being back at school, finding his place in the classroom community. There were rough patches, days when he came home overwhelmed or frustrated, but no more violent outbursts, no more bullying incidents. The calendar on our kitchen wall filled with normal activities, school projects due, therapy appointments, playdates with new friends. Mikey's backpack no longer seemed so oversized on his shoulders, as if he had grown stronger, more capable of carrying its weight. The kitchen table transformed from command central for our crisis to a normal family space again. Homework spread out in the afternoons, meals shared in the evenings, the rhythm of ordinary life gradually returning. Ms. Riley sent me daily updates, and Barbara checked in occasionally to assure me things were going well, their support creating a safety net around Mikey. 1 month after Mikey's return to school, I received a letter from the school district, the official envelope making my heart race until I read its contents. The CPS case was officially closed with no findings of abuse or neglect. Additionally, the district was implementing a comprehensive review of their special education programs, prompted in part by our complaint, systemic change growing from our individual struggle. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, the official seal of the school district visible through the envelope's window. The paper was heavy and formal, the language carefully crafted by administrators and lawyers, but the message was clear. We had won, not just for ourselves, but potentially for other children as well. The afternoon mail delivery had included bills and advertisements, along with this life-changing document, the ordinary mixed with the extraordinary, in a way that seemed to symbolize our gradual return to normalcy. That evening, as Mikey and I made dinner together, a new routine we'd established to spend quality time together, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I was carrying, the constant tension in my shoulders finally easing. "Buddy, I'm really proud of you," I said, as we chopped vegetables side by side, the rhythmic sound of our knives against the cutting board oddly soothing. "You've been so brave going back to school." The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of cooking, steam rising from pots on the stove, creating a cozy atmosphere as twilight gathered outside our windows. Mikey stood on a step stool to reach the counter comfortably, his movements careful and precise as he cut carrots into perfectly even pieces. The refrigerator hummed quietly, the dishwasher swished through its cycle, normal household sounds that now seemed precious rather than mundane. Mikey concentrated on carefully cutting a carrot into even pieces, his focus intense. "I'm not scared anymore," he said simply, the words of victory in themselves, "and I don't need to hit people. Dr. Lee says using my words is better." "She's right," I agreed, watching him work with careful precision. "How do you feel about school now?" The knife in his small hands moved steadily, creating neat, even slices that fell into perfect formation on the cutting board. Outside, rain had started to fall, droplets tapping against the kitchen window in a soothing rhythm. The overhead light cast a warm glow over our workspace, creating a bubble of comfort against the gathering darkness outside. He considered the question seriously, as he did with most things, his brow furrowed in thought. "It's better. Ms. Riley helps me, and I have 2 friends now." My heart swelled with joy and relief. Friends, that was new, a development I hadn't dared hope for. "That's awesome, Mikey." His expression remained serious, but I could see the quiet satisfaction in his eyes, the small upturn at the corner of his mouth that signaled happiness. The vegetables we'd chopped created a colorful array on the cutting board: orange carrots, green peppers, purple onions, a visual representation of how our life was becoming more vibrant again after the monochrome period of crisis. He nodded, then added casually, "I saw Ms. Jenkins yesterday." The statement so unexpected it took me a moment to process. I nearly dropped the knife I was holding, shock jolting through me. "What? Where?" "At the gas station. She was working there." He continued chopping calmly, unbothered by the encounter. "She saw me but didn't say hi." The knife in my hand suddenly felt heavier, my grip tightening reflexively at the mention of her name. Outside, a car splashed through a puddle, the sound momentarily drowning out the steady patter of rain. The kitchen light flickered briefly, that persistent electrical issue I still hadn't fixed, creating a momentary shadow across Mikey's concentrated face. I processed this information, the image of the former SNA who had caused so much trouble now working at a gas station. I felt no satisfaction, just relief that justice mistress had worked out in its own quiet way, that she was no longer in a position to harm vulnerable children. Ms. Barbara is going to help at my new school next year, Mikey added, another unexpected piece of information. New school? I asked, confused by this revelation. The vegetables sizzled as I added them to the hot pan, steam rising in fragrant clouds that momentarily fogged the kitchen window. Mikey watched the cooking process with fascination, his eyes tracking the transformation of raw ingredients into dinner. The wooden spoon made a satisfying sound as it moved through the mixture, a rhythmic scraping that punctuated our conversation. Ms. Riley said I can go to the special science school if I keep doing good in math, he explained matter-of-factly. Ms. Barbara is going to teach there too. I made a mental note to ask Ms. Riley about this science school at our next meeting, intrigued by the possibility. If Mikey was excited about it, I wanted to learn more, wanted to nurture this newfound academic interest. The possibility of a specialized science program seemed to energize Mikey, his movements becoming more animated as he described what little he knew about it. The kitchen window had fogged completely from the cooking steam, creating a cozy barrier between our warm home and the rainy evening outside. The timer on the stove beeped, signaling the next step in our recipe, the sound bringing us back to the immediate task of dinner preparation. That night, after Mikey went to bed, I sat on the couch reflecting on how much had changed in just a few months. From the horror of watching my son suffer allergic reactions from forced peanut consumption, to the misguided attempt at justice that taught him violence was acceptable, to the betrayal by someone who should have protected him, we had weathered it all, emerging stronger on the other side. The house was quiet, except for the gentle patter of rain against the windows and the occasional creak of settling wood. The living room was illuminated only by a single lamp, creating pools of warm light surrounded by comfortable shadows. Through Mikey's partially open bedroom door, I could hear his soft, even breathing, the sound of peaceful sleep that had once seemed an impossible luxury during our darkest days. And somehow, we'd come out stronger, more resilient. Mikey was learning healthier ways to express himself, was making friends, was showing interest in his education. He had supportive adults in his life, beyond just me, and I had learned to advocate fiercely for my son without compromising our values, had found strength I didn't know I possessed. The photo of Mikey and me on the side table caught the lamplight, his smile wide and genuine, taken during a recent weekend trip to the Science Museum, a reminder of how far we'd come. The rain continued steadily outside, washing away the day's dust and grime, perhaps symbolically cleansing away the last remnants of our difficult past. My coffee mug sat empty on the side table, a ring of brown marking where the last sip had been, ordinary evidence of an increasingly ordinary life. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from my boss at the warehouse, his gruff voice unusually warm. "Thomas, how would you feel about a promotion?" he asked without preamble, getting straight to the point as was his way. "Assistant manager position just opened up. Better pay, more regular hours. You've earned it." Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as I took the call, creating bright patterns on the tile floor. The coffee maker gurgled in the background, filling the room with its rich aroma. Outside, birds chirped in the tree near our window, their morning songs creating a cheerful soundtrack to this unexpected good news. Mikey's cereal bowl sat in the sink, small drops of milk dried on its rim, a normal breakfast detail that now seemed precious in its ordinariness. I was speechless for a moment, the offer coming out of nowhere. Yes, absolutely, thank you, I managed to say, gratitude washing over me. "Don't thank me," he said gruffly, uncomfortable with emotion. "You've been one of our most reliable workers for years, and the way you've handled everything with your boy, well, it shows character." His voice had that forced casualness men often use when expressing something meaningful, the gruffness failing to hide the genuine respect beneath. The kitchen clock showed 8:37 a.m., the day still fresh with possibility. Through the window, I could see our neighbor watering plants on her balcony, an ordinary morning routine that somehow emphasized how extraordinary this moment felt. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, a strange feeling washing over me, unfamiliar but welcome. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like things were truly going to be okay. Not perfect, not without challenges, but okay, manageable, hopeful. The feeling settled over me like a comfortable blanket, warm and reassuring. The kitchen was filled with morning sunlight, dust motes dancing in the golden beams that streamed through the windows. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, water dripped from the faucet, ordinary sounds that now seemed like music, the soundtrack of a life that had found its rhythm again, after so much discord. When I picked Mikey up from school that afternoon, he ran to me with a paper in his hand, a math test with a large A+ at the top, the red mark bright against the white paper. "Look, Daddy," he exclaimed, flapping his free hand excitedly, his whole body vibrating with joy. I did it. The school playground was filled with the sounds of children playing, parents chatting, car doors opening and closing, the normal chaos of end-of-day pickup. Mikey's face was flushed with excitement, his eyes bright with pride, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders as he ran toward me. The test paper fluttered in the afternoon breeze, the red A+ like a banner of victory against the white background. I hugged him tight, my heart full to bursting with love and pride. "You sure did, buddy. You sure did." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the school parking lot, bathing everything in a golden glow that seemed fitting waiting for this moment of triumph. Mikey's body was warm against mine as I hugged him, his heart beating rapidly with excitement. Around us, life continued, cars pulling away, children calling goodbyes to friends, teachers heading home after a long day. But for that moment, our world consisted only of this victory, this connection, this hard-won peace we had fought so desperately to achieve.